The rain had only just ceased when the faintest tremor passed through the panes of our sitting-room window, a vibration so slight that I should have missed it had Holmes not lifted his head from the Persian slipper. "A carriage stopped, Watson," he murmured, eyes half closed. "But note the rhythm. The driver hesitates. Our caller debates retreat." Before I could reply, a hesitant knock sounded. Twice, then once again, as if modesty and desperation wrestled at the threshold. The fire crackled. The coals settled with a sound like a sigh. Holmes gestured toward the door. "Pray admit our indecisive guest." The man who entered was narrow of frame and nervously elegant. An Oxford coat frayed at the cuffs, eyes that darted from portrait to hearth, yet refused the offered chair. He clutched his gloves as though they were arguments he dared not release. "My name is Weller, Lionel Weller," he said. "I beg you, Mr. Holmes, forgive this intrusion at such an hour. I cannot sit. The very notion revolts me." Holmes's brows arched. "A remarkable aversion, Mr. Weller. You are neither wounded nor ill. Yet the idea of a seat offends you." "I have not slept in a bed these 3 nights," the man whispered. "And to sit, sir, feels perilously close to lying down." The poker slipped in my grasp, striking the grate with a metallic clang, the first note of our case's motif. Holmes's voice softened. "Then your terror is not of sleep itself, but of what the bed conceals." A shudder crossed Weller's face. "Exactly. My sister's bed, Mr. Holmes. She lies in it still, though she is dead, and yet the bed breathes." He spoke the final word with such naked dread that the fire seemed to shrink from it. Holmes regarded him a long moment, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Describe the phenomenon without embellishment." Weller obeyed with trembling precision. "Each night since her death, the servants hear movement in her room. Faint, rhythmic, like the stir of lungs beneath linen. The mattress rises, then falls. They swear it draws air." Holmes inclined his head. "And the body?" "Embalmed at once, as was her wish. No corruption, no scent. The physician sealed the coffin within the very frame of the bed. It has not been opened." "Sealed? Inside the bed itself?" I exclaimed. "A custom piece," Weller said hoarsely. "My late father's device. He fancied the notion of a concealed chamber, a mechanical novelty. It was her bridal gift." Holmes rose, pacing with quick, silent steps. "A sleeping contrivance that contains a coffin. Ingenious and grotesque. Continue." "The night before her death," Weller went on, "she cried out that the bed breathed with her. The doctor found no cause, only exhaustion. By morning she was gone. I returned from London, demanded the device remain sealed, but now the housemaid swears she hears the same breathing, though the room is locked." Holmes halted beside the window. "And you, Mr. Weller, do you believe her?" The man hesitated. "I have heard it myself." The coal collapsed inward, releasing a hollow exhalation like a sleeper's sigh. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Watson, our motif has declared itself. Breathing where there should be none." He turned briskly to Weller. "You will return to your estate tonight. Leave the room precisely as it is. At 8 tomorrow, Dr. Watson and I will attend you." Weller's relief came in gasps. "You mean you will come?" "I seldom decline an invitation to a bed that will not let its occupant rest," Holmes said dryly. "Watson, make note of the address." As our visitor backed toward the door, his unease seemed to infect the air. Even after he departed, the room retained his tremor. Holmes stood motionless, listening. "The human imagination is a most precise instrument," he murmured. "It seldom invents what it does not first perceive." I reached for my notebook. "Do you suspect trickery?" "Not yet. Only that the bed breathes, and London tonight holds its breath with it." Outside, a distant coach wheel struck a loose stone, echoing that earlier metallic clang. The sound lingered like a question unanswered. The coach that bore us to Surrey rattled with the monotony of rain upon its hood, a steady respiration of the night that seemed to echo the unnatural breathing our visitor had described. Holmes sat beside me, gloved hands motionless, eyes half-lidded, yet unblinking. Every few moments he drew the tip of his finger against the fogged glass, tracing what I realized were rhythmic intervals. 6 short, 2 long, a code of pulse and silence. "Ah, Watson," he murmured without turning. "It is always the air that betrays deception." When we reached the Weller estate, dawn was a pale rumour behind the elms. The servant who met us at the gate, a boy of 16, led us into a hall where dust sheeted every portrait and the clock had stopped at 3:30. "Master says you're to go straight up," he whispered. "But mind the room. The air moves there, sir, when nothing should." Holmes gave a small nod. "Your master has keenly bred imagination in his household. Lead the way." The corridor narrowed, floorboards giving the smallest sigh with each step. The motif of that breathing, in timber, in the hush of the walls, seemed alive. When we reached the door, Weller waited with candle trembling. "It began again not half an hour ago," he said. We all heard it. Holmes gestured for silence, then knelt, placing his ear against the lock. His hand flicked outward, demanding the key. Weller produced it from a chain at his neck, fingers shaking. The door opened with reluctant grace. Within, the bed dominated the chamber, an immense mahogany structure whose carved posts rose like sentinels. The coverlet lay smooth as water's surface, yet beneath it the faintest ripple moved, lifting the linen by the breadth of a finger, falling again. A sound followed, measured, hollow, as though the room itself drew breath. Holmes stepped forward, candle held low. The light wavered across the headboard, revealing a small bronze plate embedded in the wood. "Curious," he murmured. "A craftsman's seal. Note Watson, the mark of J.D. Parr and Sons, Clerkenwell. Precision instrument makers. You suggest a mechanism?" "I suggest intent," he said softly. "Observe." He pressed the panel at the base of the frame. A muted click replied, and the bed exhaled, a long sighing rush that extinguished half the candle flame. Weller covered his face. "You see, it breathes." Holmes turned sharply. "No, sir, it releases. The difference is vital. We shall discover presently what it inhales." From his pocket came his small folding rule and a thin-bladed knife. In silence he measured, probed the joinery, tapped the planks. Each note answered differently, until one gave a duller tone. He pried it open. A faint metallic coil gleamed beneath the wood, connected to a valve that led downward into the floorboards. "An air conduit," Holmes said, "driven from below by—" He paused, then smiled faintly. "By human intervention or its semblance." I felt the hairs rise on my neck. "Then someone hides beneath?" "Unlikely. The cavity is too narrow, but the air is guided. Note how it expands the bedding with mechanical rhythm." Holmes's hand brushed the sheet. The rise and fall ceased instantly, replaced by a hollow hiss as the air reversed direction, drawing inward. For an instant, the coverlet clung to his palm like living skin. He withdrew calmly. "Ingenious construction, cruel in effect. The question is why." Weller sank into a chair he had sworn never to touch. "Do you mean it's deliberate?" Holmes's voice hardened. "My dear sir, death seldom builds its own theatre." He knelt again, tracing the conduit's line toward the wall. There he found a narrow brass panel half hidden by the skirting. "Watson, your penknife." I handed it. With a deft motion, he lifted the plate, revealing a series of tiny cogs and a spring coiled about a spindle. It ticked faintly, once every 2 seconds, releasing a measured puff of air through the pipe. "A clockwork respirator," he pronounced. Powered, I suspect, by winding from the adjoining room. Someone wished to create the illusion of breath long after life had gone. Weller stared in horror. But who would? Why? That, Mr. Weller, is the substance of our inquiry. Tell me, who possessed the key to this chamber besides yourself? No one. Since her death, I've kept it upon me always. Then we must seek another form of access. Holmes gestured to the far wall where a faded tapestry hung stiff with dust. Behind it lay a small door, bolted from within. A service panel for the mechanism, perhaps. Holmes examined its hinges, then produced a wire and set to work. Who designed this bed originally? My father, an inventor by whim, though he never sold a thing. He meant it as protection, a resting place that could regulate warmth and air. He called it the sleeper's guardian. Holmes looked up. A guardian turned warden. The bolt yielded. The door opened onto darkness. The air that issued forth was cold, metallic, the breath of the machine itself. Holmes stooped, lamp raised. The conduit continues downward. Watson, do you note the dust pattern? Only that it is disturbed. Precisely. Someone has been winding this device within the last 12 hours. You may observe the fresh oil about the gears. The corpse may be dead, but the crime breathes still. At that instant, a faint, rhythmic creak echoed from beneath the floorboards, as though a slow foot trod upon hidden boards. The sound grew, merged with the whisper of air, until it formed a single dreadful imitation of respiration. Holmes straightened, expression unreadable. Our unseen hand still turns. Then someone is below, I whispered. Not below, Watson. Adjacent. There must be a passage linking this wall to the house's old heating system. We shall trace it. Mr. Weller, light every lamp upon this floor and instruct your servants to remain together. No one is to descend to the cellar. He listened a moment longer. The rhythm faltered, 2 long sighs, then silence. Holmes exhaled once, deliberately, as if to claim the breath the house had stolen. The illusion ceases when observed, he said quietly. We are expected. The candle guttered, its flame bending toward the opened cavity, drawn by the bed's vanishing breath. The sound that followed was neither wind nor whisper, but something between, the brief, gasping echo of a presence retreating. Holmes's lamp illuminated the narrow cavity, revealing a shaft scarcely wide enough for a man to crawl through. The brass tubing vanished into the gloom like a vein feeding the heart of the house. This conduit, he said, must lead to the clockwork chamber, and to whoever winds it. He knelt, fingers brushing the inner edge of the panel. The dust here is disturbed again. Fresh scratches and lappe. The metal has been opened from the far side. Then our intruder entered through the adjoining room, I murmured. Or from beneath, he replied. The angle of descent suggests a junction below the floorboards. The mechanism breathes because someone wishes us to believe that death itself exhales. Weller's voice trembled. But to what end, Mr. Holmes? My sister is gone. Who profits by terror? Holmes glanced at him, eyes sharp as glass. Terror is a currency, Mr. Weller. One spends it to purchase silence. Before I could question him further, a faint sound rose through the gap. A metallic turn, measured and deliberate, followed by that dreadful sighing exhalation. Holmes's expression hardened. He winds it now. Without hesitation, he snatched his revolver from his coat and passed me the lamp. Stay close. We follow the breath to its source. The hidden passage ran behind the wall and sloped downward in a series of cramped turns. The air grew colder, charged with the faint hiss of escaping pressure. At intervals, the mechanism's breath pulsed through the tubing beside us, a steady, lifelike rhythm that made the narrow space seem inhabited. We emerged into a low chamber beneath the bedroom, lined with copper pipes and wheels. In the center stood a table upon which lay a key of intricate design. Beside it rested a small oil can and a notebook bound in cracked calfskin. Holmes examined the key first. "Observe the teeth, Watson. Unusually deep, for turning resistance under tension. It must wind the main spring that powers the air pump." He then opened the notebook. Its pages were filled with spidery script. Cycle 14. Pressure maintained. Subject responds with regular motion, the sound now indistinguishable from respiration. He looked up. A scientist's hand, not a madman's. The signature, J.D. Parr, the very craftsman whose plate we saw upon the bed. Then the maker himself maintained the contrivance. "Maintained, or repurposed," Holmes said grimly. "This entry is dated after Miss Weller's death." At that instant, the air pump gave another soft gasp. Holmes's head turned sharply toward a second corridor leading from the chamber. "Footsteps," he whispered. "Remain silent." We extinguished the lamp and waited. From the corridor came the faint scrape of a shoe, then the unmistakable rhythm of breathing, not mechanical now, but human, labored. A figure appeared in the faint light of the pressure gauge. An elderly man with gray hair, flattened by sweat, winding the valve with trembling precision. Holmes moved forward like a shadow. "Mr. Parr, I presume." The man spun, nearly dropping the key. Who calls me that?" "Sherlock Holmes," came the reply. "And this is Dr. Watson. We attend you on behalf of your late client's brother, whose nights you have filled with phantoms." Parr's features twisted between fear and pride. "You have no right here." "I have every right where deceit steals peace from the living," Holmes retorted. "Explain your nocturnal respiration before I draw my own conclusion." The engineer sagged against the wheel. "I did not mean to frighten him. I only wished to preserve her invention. She was to be my partner in design. The night she died, I completed the mechanism she conceived. A bed that would sustain the illusion of life. She called it her final experiment in rest." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "You claim she devised this?" "She dreamed of it. The guardian was hers. I merely perfected the breath." His voice broke. "When her brother sealed the bed, he silenced her genius. I came only to keep it alive, to let it breathe as she intended." I felt a pang of pity, yet Holmes's tone remained unyielding. "A noble delusion, sir, but the act was intrusion, not devotion. You have trespassed nightly and tampered with the dead." Parr's eyes glistened. "Would you have me bury perfection? She feared death's stillness. She begged me that the bed should never cease to move. I honored her plea." Holmes folded his arms. "Then honor has turned inventor's sentiment into ghostcraft. Did you imagine Mr. Weller would interpret the breathing as mechanical elegance?" Parr's shoulders sank. He would not listen. He forbade all mention of her designs, so I came in secret each night to wind the spring. The house itself seemed to need it. When I ceased, the air grew heavy, as though she waited for the next turn. Holmes's voice softened slightly. "You wound it tonight?" "Yes, to prove she still breathes." "Then your proof has condemned you." Holmes's hand closed around the key. "This mechanism is a lie that feeds on grief. You shall remove it under my supervision. Mr. Weller must learn that the dead rest when the living permit them to." A tremor passed through the pipes, a final sigh escaping the system, long and low, before silence claimed it. Parr covered his ears. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," Holmes said. "Peace at last." Yet even as he spoke, another sound answered, faint, irregular, not from the machinery, but from the passage behind us. A second breath, soft as cloth drawn across wood. Holmes froze. That, Watson, was no valve. We turned. The corridor we had entered now exhaled a chill so sudden that our lamps flickered. A pale draught brushed my cheek, carrying a scent of lavender and iron. Holmes lowered his revolver. "Someone else tends this tomb." Parr stammered. "No one comes here but I." "Then she has an accomplice," Holmes cut in. "A living one." The breathing came again. 2 slow inhalations, then a cough, distinctly human and near. Holmes extinguished the lamp, letting darkness swallow the walls. Remain still. Whoever attends the second conduit will reveal himself by sound. We waited. After a long pause, there came the click of a door closing far above, followed by the faint tremor of retreating steps. Holmes straightened. He withdraws through the servants' stair. The ghost has a pulse, after all. He turned to Pa, whose hands trembled violently. You will come with us. The truth still lies between invention and intent. But now, at least, we know this house breathes with 2 lungs, one of brass, one of flesh. The words hung in the stale air until the silence itself seemed to inhale. From somewhere above, a floorboard creaked, deliberate, listening, alive. The creak above lengthened into a slow, deliberate rhythm. One tread, then another, until it blended once more with the remembered pulse of the mechanical breathing. Holmes raised a finger for silence. He pauses at every step, he whispered. A cautious man who knows where the boards complain. Pa clutched his chest. I swear I am alone here. Holmes's gaze sharpened. A statement contradicted by sound, sir. Watson, keep your revolver ready. Whoever moves above us has listened to our every word. We ascended the narrow passage, our boots pressing lightly on the boards that had betrayed the intruder's path. The air was thick with dust, yet now and again a faint draught drifted down the stair. That same uncanny exhalation, half mechanical, half human. When we reached the door at the top, Holmes paused. Note the brass handle, he murmured. Still warm. Our quarry touched it moments ago. He turned it without noise and motioned for me to follow. The door opened into a corridor lined with closed rooms. A lamp burned dimly at the far end, where a servant's stair descended toward the kitchen. Holmes moved along the wall, examining the floor for trace. At the second doorway, he stopped, knelt, and pointed. A thread of white silk, he whispered, freshly torn. Observe the faint perfume, lavender, identical to the scent below. Our listener is no man. Then who? Patience. He eased the door inward. Within, the small chamber was plainly furnished, its single window curtained. On the dressing table lay a silver brush, a mirror, and an unfinished letter. Beside these, the candle guttered, throwing restless shadows across the paper. Holmes stepped forward and read aloud. Brother, you must forgive what I do. The heir must move, else she will return. I cannot bear her stillness. E. Holmes folded the page carefully. E for Evelyn, I presume. Your sister's maid, Mr. Weller. The young man, pale from the chase, nodded from the threshold. She attended my sister since childhood, but she left the house after the funeral, overcome with grief. Then she returned unseen, Holmes said, to tend her mistress as before, to wind the breath that death had taken. We heard it again then, a low inhalation through the floorboards, rising to a fluttering sigh that seemed to travel the very walls. Holmes turned sharply toward the wardrobe. The sound issues from here. He flung open the doors. Inside, amid the hanging garments, a narrow panel stood ajar. Beyond it yawned another cavity of shadow and whispering air. A pale face glimmered within. A woman's, eyes wide with dread. Evelyn, Holmes said gently, step out, if you please. She obeyed with trembling limbs. Her gown was the same shade of morning grey as the dust that clung to her. I meant no harm, she whispered. I only listened to make sure she slept. Holmes regarded her keenly. Your mistress cannot sleep nor wake. Why did you return? She called me, the woman murmured, clasping her hands. Each night when the house was still, I heard her voice, faint beneath the floor. She said she was cold. Weller's voice cracked. You imagined it. Evelyn shook her head. I heard it truly. Then I found the little door behind the tapestry, and the air that moved there. It seemed to answer her voice. I thought if I kept it turning, she would rest easy. Holmes's tone remained calm, but his eyes were calculating. You wound the machine yourself? Yes, but I could not manage the great spring. I begged Mr. Parr for help. He swore me to silence, saying it was for science, for her memory. Parr groaned. I only wished to maintain her invention. I swear I did not deceive this girl. Holmes cut him short. Whether deception or delusion, you have together turned grief into haunting. He paced once around the room, observing the pattern of dust upon the boards. And yet, someone else has entered since. There are boot marks broader than yours, Mr. Parr. Watson, observe the direction, toward the window. I crossed to it. The latch was broken, the outer sill scored with fresh scratches. Forced from without, I said. Indeed, Holmes replied. Miss Evelyn, did you speak of this to anyone? She hesitated. Only to the vicar's clerk. He asked kindly after me in the churchyard. I told him I meant to return here to tend her resting place. Holmes's face darkened. Then we have our second lung, Watson. Someone exploited her faith to mask a theft. A theft? Weller echoed. Holmes turned the mirror on the dressing table so that its reflection caught the underside of the bed visible through the open panel. Note the glimmer beneath the sheet, a dull gleam where the coffin should rest. Gold fittings, perhaps. Weller's breath caught. My father buried with her a necklace of considerable worth, our mother's legacy. Holmes nodded, and our intruder has learned it lies within reach of this breathing marvel. He uses the illusion of movement to deter inspection. At that instant, a faint metallic clink rose from below, the sound of something delicate striking wood. Holmes's head snapped up. He works even now. Without another word, he darted for the door, revolver drawn. I followed, the others behind us. Down the stair, the air grew thicker with that rhythmic pulse. 2 inhalations, a pause, and one long sigh. As we entered the chamber once more, the sight froze us. The coffin lid within the bed stood half lifted, held by a figure bent low over it. A man in dark clerical garb, his hand glittering with a stolen necklace. He started at our entrance, the chain slipping through his fingers with a chime of gold. Holmes, I cried. Do not move, said my companion evenly. You are the vicar's clerk, I believe. Or shall I call you by your real name? Edward Parr. The thief's eyes widened. You knew? Holmes advanced slowly. Your father here built the machine. You improved upon his deception. While he tended his ghost, you harvested from the grave. Edward's face twisted. It was mine by right. She promised me partnership. She promised brilliance, not blasphemy. Holmes said coldly. Drop the jewels. For a moment, the man wavered. Then from beneath the bed came a sudden hiss, violent and sustained. The sound of the mechanism breathing its last. The candle flames bent toward it as if drawn into a single vast inhalation. Holmes's eyes flashed. Back, Watson! The spring! A moment later, the device exhaled with explosive force, scattering dust and gold alike. The bed shuddered. The thief stumbled backward against the wall, gasping as the air burst around him like a dying lung. When the echo faded, only a faint wheeze remained, the last sorrowful breath of the machine. The final wheeze of the machine faded into silence, leaving only the soft ticking of Holmes's watch and the rasp of our own breathing. The thief slumped against the wall, the chain still clutched in his trembling hand. Holmes stooped and retrieved it delicately with the barrel of his revolver. An inheritance of sentiment, he said quietly. Yet men will kill for less. Edward Parr's chest heaved. You don't understand. She asked me to protect her work. Father would have destroyed it. Holmes regarded him coolly. Protection by desecration? You have turned her invention into theater for greed. Were you content to rob her grave each night under the cover of devotion? The younger man's eyes flashed. It was mine. She left no will, no word. I gave her the breath she dreamed of, the illusion that she lived. Is that not mercy?" Holmes's tone sharpened. "Mercy is truth, not delusion. You exploited a woman's grief, a servant's faith, and a brother's ignorance." He gestured to the broken conduit, where the final trace of steam escaped in slow white curls. "Even your ghost cannot bear the lie it served." Evelyn fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching the side rail as though it were a shrine. "Stop," she cried softly. He only wanted her to rest. Holmes bent beside her, voice low but firm. "Miss Evelyn, rest belongs to the dead, not to those who counterfeit their silence. This machine gave neither life nor peace, only the imitation of both." Her sob was the only sound, punctuated by a faint, irregular hiss from the fractured valve. The motif of breathing, now broken, halting, filled the room with the suggestion of a dying creature. Holmes straightened. "Watson, attend to Mr. Weller. He appears near collapse." The young man leaned heavily upon the mantel, face ashen. "To think," he murmured, "that I feared the grave itself, when it was the living who kept it moving." Holmes nodded once. "Indeed, the dead are blameless, Mr. Weller. It is the living who wind the springs of deceit." A low moan escaped the younger Pa. "You would hand me to the police?" Holmes examined him for a long moment. "Theft, trespass, interference with the dead, all grave offenses, and yet there is something pitiable in your obsession. It began as devotion twisted by resentment. Confess the truth of your father's role, and I may persuade the magistrate to leniency." Edward's head fell forward. "He built it for her dowry," he whispered, "said it would preserve her beauty forever. But when she rejected him, rejected me, he sealed the device, hiding his failure. After her death, he forced me to wind it, to prove it worked. He told me if I stopped, the body would decay and shame us both." Holmes's eyes narrowed. So the breathing was never for her comfort, but for his vanity. "Yes," Edward breathed. "He called it the lung of the dead. A triumph, he said. But when she died, I couldn't bear the silence. I took the jewels to fund repairs. Then it became need." "Need," Holmes repeated softly. "A fitting word for the disease of deceit." He turned to the elder Pa, who sat motionless in the chair. "And you, sir, do you deny your complicity?" The old man's eyes glimmered in the lamp's light. "I deny nothing," he said hoarsely. "I created life from stillness. What is crime compared to that?" "An echo is not life," Holmes replied sharply. "And your invention has killed, if not in body, then in peace." The old man rose unsteadily. "You speak of peace as though you knew it. You feed on death yourself. Other men's deaths, other tragedies. Tell me, Mr. Holmes, are you so different?" For the first time that night, Holmes hesitated. His gaze dropped to the mechanism, then to the faint plume still curling from its valve. When he spoke, his tone was measured, almost weary. "The difference, Mr. Pa, lies in purpose. I unmask illusions. You built them." He snapped the revolver open and set it aside. "Watson, note the following. The breathing illusion was achieved through a dual-spring pump fed by weighted bellows under tension. It could maintain rhythmic motion for roughly 6 hours per winding. Ingenious, yes, but its precision condemns it." Edward stared through his fingers. "What will happen now?" Holmes gestured toward the necklace in my hand. "Restitution first, then justice. I shall send Inspector Gregson to collect you both in the morning." Evelyn rose shakily. Will they take me too?" "You will give your statement and be released," Holmes said. "Your only crime was love misdirected. But I advise you to leave this house. The air here will never breathe kindly again." She nodded, clutching her shawl as if to ward off the silence that had replaced the machine's sigh. Holmes examined the coffin once more, then turned to Weller. "The body must be removed to a proper graveyard. The contrivance should be dismantled entirely. "I shall see to it at once," Weller said, voice steadier. "You have my word." "Then, Watson," Holmes murmured, "our work here is nearly concluded." Yet even as he spoke, a faint metallic rhythm answered from the corridor, a slow, dragging scrape, like iron drawn across stone. Holmes's head snapped up. "The mechanism is destroyed," I whispered. "So it should be," he replied, "and yet something breathes still." We followed the sound into the adjoining passage. The light trembled along the walls, catching on copper piping that pulsed faintly with residual motion. Holmes touched it. The metal quivered under his fingertips. "Residual pressure?" I asked. "Perhaps," he said, though his voice was uncertain. "Or something left unwound." He bent close, ear against the pipe. The faint pulse became clearer. 2 slow beats, a pause, 1 short intake. The same rhythm that had haunted the house from the beginning. Holmes looked up, eyes bright with real unease. "Watson, this line leads not to the bed, but beyond, toward the old west wing." "That wing is sealed," said Weller from behind us. "Abandoned since my father's death." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then we are not finished. If air still moves there, someone or something keeps it moving." He turned toward the darkened hall, the echo of the breath now guiding us forward once more. Slower, weaker, yet unbroken, like the last whisper of conscience before confession. The faint breathing in the pipe guided us through the corridor like a dying pulse. Each exhalation seemed to draw us onward, into that forbidden wing where dust had lain undisturbed for years. Holmes moved swiftly, his lamp cutting a golden arc through the darkness. "The west wing, Watson," he murmured, "was sealed to conceal more than decay. Its silence is too deliberate." Weller followed with visible reluctance. "My father forbade us entry after the fire. The rafters are unstable. It's dangerous to go further." Holmes's reply was dry. "Danger, Mr. Weller, is merely an unpleasant form of curiosity, and curiosity, once awakened, insists on breath." The door that separated the west wing from the rest of the house was boarded and nailed, yet one corner had been prized loose. Holmes drew out his knife, slipped the blade beneath the plank, and levered it free. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out, dry, yet faintly rhythmic, as though the very wing inhaled our presence. "The motif persists," Holmes whispered. "Our unseen lung still functions." We entered. The chamber beyond was long and low, roof beams charred from the old fire. The air was thick with the smell of oil and iron. Holmes raised his lamp. The light revealed a great brass cylinder half buried in the wall, its surface alive with faint vibration. Pipes led from it into the floor, vanishing toward the east, the same system that had fed the bed above. "Behold," Holmes murmured, "the true heart of the contrivance, the reservoir of breath." I stepped closer. Then the air we heard in the bedchamber was drawn from here. Indeed, the illusion of respiration depends upon pressure and rhythm. Yet this device continues to breathe though the springs below are broken. Someone has rewound the source. At that moment, a soft metallic click echoed behind us, the unmistakable turn of a key in a lock. We spun round. The door through which we had come now stood closed, a figure framed within its narrow light, the elder Parr. He leaned heavily on his cane, but his eyes burned with feverish triumph. "You followed the breath, as I knew you would." Holmes's voice was cold. "Then it was you who reactivated the mechanism." "Reactivated?" the old man sneered. "I revived it. Do you think I would let my life's creation perish under your moral sermon? This engine is immortality, Holmes. It breathes because I command it. As long as it moves, she is not lost." Holmes stepped between him and the machine. "You mistake continuity for life, Mr. Parr. This is not her voice. It is your guilt hissing through brass." Parr raised a trembling hand. "You call it guilt. I call it victory. When flesh fails, invention remains. My daughter's beauty will never fade while the house breathes her name. Weller started forward. Daughter? You were her father. The old man's face contorted. Did he not tell you? Did he not know? Evelyn was my child, your sister's maid, your playmate, the one who tended her unto death. My invention was for her, not for the corpse you worshipped. The revelation struck us all into stunned silence. Holmes alone remained composed. Then your grief built this tomb of deceit for both women, he said quietly. One you buried in brass, the other in madness. Parr's hand tightened upon the valve of the machine. They are one and the same. The bed, the air, the breath, all of it is her memory. You think me mad, but I have given the dead their own heartbeat. Holmes's eyes flashed. And in doing so, you have stifled the living. Stand away, sir. That pressure gauge nears rupture. I will not, Parr cried. If this heart stops, so do I. The gauge needle trembled against its limit. Holmes lunged forward, seizing the lever. Watson, the valve! Together we wrested it from his grasp. Steam burst forth in a violent jet, hissing across the room like a serpent's breath. The old man reeled backward, choking. You kill her, he gasped. You kill us both. Holmes dragged me toward the wall as the main cylinder shuddered. A seam split, white vapor filled the air, swirling around us with the sound of thousands of whispering lungs. Through it all, Parr's voice rose and broke. Do you hear her? She forgives me. Holmes's reply cut through the roar. That is not forgiveness, but physics. The cylinder gave a final groan, then burst open with a thunderous exhalation. The lamps guttered, every window blew outward in a gust of freed air. For an instant it seemed the entire house drew one vast, shattering breath, and then was still. When the steam cleared, Parr lay collapsed beside the ruptured tank, his hand outstretched toward the valve. Weller bent over him, but Holmes stopped him with a touch. No pulse, he said quietly. He has exhaled his last. We stood amid the wreckage, the silence oppressive after that violent symphony. Only the faint drip of condensed moisture echoed in the rafters. I could not help murmuring. He died believing he'd breathed life into death. Holmes replied, voice subdued. And yet it was death that breathed life into his delusion, a perfect inversion. He looked about the shattered chamber. We have heard the last breath of the house, Watson, but its echoes will linger. Weller knelt beside the fallen man, grief and confusion mingling on his face. Then it ends here. Holmes shook his head. No. It ends only when the living cease to listen for what the dead will never say. He turned toward the corridor. The house seemed to sigh with us as we left the ruined heart behind. But before we reached the hall, a single soft whisper drifted down the pipe. Lighter than steam, fainter than wind, yet unmistakable. Holmes stopped mid-step. That, Watson, he said under his breath, was no mechanical residue. The sound came again, a breath shaped into the ghost of a word. It might have been father, or merely the last echo of the machine dying through the walls. Holmes held his lamp steady, the flame trembling in rhythm with that faint whisper. You heard it as well, Watson? Distinctly, I replied. A voice, or what mimics one. Then the illusion persists beyond its architect's death, he said grimly. Curious. Machines seldom mourn their makers. He knelt beside the fractured cylinder, his fingers tracing the splintered metal. There must be residual pressure still feeding a secondary conduit. The word we heard, if word it was, may have been expelled, air force through a narrow aperture, much like a child's whistle when cracked. And yet, I murmured, it sounded almost intentional. Holmes looked up sharply. Yes, too precise for accident. He rose, scanning the dark wall where the pipes vanished. The air had cooled, yet every few seconds a faint sigh passed through the system, as though the house refused to surrender its breath. Holmes turned to Weller. "Fetch me a poker and a length of cord. Quickly." The young man obeyed. Holmes bound the lamp to the poker's end, forming a makeshift probe. "Now, Watson, we follow the current as one would follow a bloodstream." We advanced through the corridor, the piping running parallel to the skirting, its rhythm soft but steady. The farther we went, the clearer it became, a subtle vibration beneath our feet. It was no longer mere wind, but something that throbbed, as if alive. Holmes stopped before a section of wall where the plaster bulged outward. "Here, the resonance amplifies." He pressed his ear against the surface and listened. After a moment he whispered, "There's a cavity beyond, and movement." He struck the wall with his cane. A hollow clang answered, followed by a breath that seemed to draw inward sharply, as if startled. Holmes stepped back. "Remarkable. The system reacts to sound." "You mean it listens?" I asked. "In a manner of speaking, every resonance chamber reflects vibration. This one, however, behaves like an ear." He pried the plaster loose with the poker, revealing a narrow recess. Within glimmered a brass diaphragm attached to a tangle of wires and gears. The device quivered faintly, emitting the smallest sigh. "A phonograph element," Holmes murmured. Designed to capture and replay, Mr. Parr's obsession extended beyond respiration. He sought voice itself. Weller stared in disbelief. "Then the machine can speak?" "Not speak," Holmes corrected. "Repeat." He recorded fragments of his daughter's voice, perhaps even his own, and bound them to the rhythm of air. The result is the illusion of conversation between the living and the dead. The significance of his words chilled me. Then what we heard, the father, was the final echo of an engineer's grief, Holmes finished softly. "And yet the mechanism still functions. Observe the wire leading downward." He followed it with his gaze to where it disappeared beneath the floorboards. "It connects to the primary bellows chamber. There is power enough for one final exhalation." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Watson, we are about to hear the truth from the dead man's own contrivance." He turned a small wheel beside the diaphragm. At once, the system emitted a slow intake, followed by a hollow, trembling voice. "Evelyn, the breath must not stop. Keep her alive." The words fractured and repeated, rising and falling like air drawn through a dying throat. Holmes's face hardened. A command loop. He programmed his own delusion into the machine. Poor devil. But then the voice altered. The tone became lighter, distinctly feminine. "Father, please, let me rest." Holmes froze. "That, Watson, is no echo I expected." "Surely another recording," I whispered. He shook his head. "No. Note the modulation. The consonants vary. The earlier phonograph could not achieve such clarity through residual air alone. This voice is immediate." Evelyn clutched her shawl. "I heard it before, when I wound the bed. She would whisper through the pipe. I thought it comfort." Holmes raised a hand. "Speak not. Let the air reply." The sigh came again, longer this time, resolving into a rasping syllable that could have been either breath or name. Holmes stiffened visibly. "Ah," he said quietly, "even the grave grows impertinent." But the moment's irony vanished as a rush of air thundered through the pipes, shaking the walls. The lamp guttered. Dust rained from the rafters. Weller seized my arm. "It's collapsing." Holmes's voice cut through the din. "No, it's releasing the remaining pressure. The system is purging itself." From deep within the house came a roar, followed by a long, shuddering exhalation that swept through every corridor. Doors slammed open, curtains billowed inward as though the building gasped its final confession. Holmes steadied himself against the wall. The house dies as it lived, in breath. When the gust subsided, we stood amid utter stillness. Yet from the shattered device before us, there issued one last, gentle whisper, a single syllable so frail it might have been the echo of memory itself. "Peace." Holmes bent close, listening. The sound faded into silence, leaving only the faint drip of condensed moisture down the brass. He straightened slowly. The machine has spoken its own epitaph. Weller swallowed hard. "Then it's finished?" Holmes nodded once. "Yes. At last she rests, and he with her." We turned to leave, but as Holmes stepped past the broken diaphragm, a faint vibration touched his hand. "Curious," he murmured. "The system still holds warmth." "Feel it, Watson." I placed my fingers on the brass. It pulsed faintly beneath the skin, like a dying heart that refused its final beat. Holmes's expression darkened. "Even in ruin, invention imitates the persistence of life. But remember this, my friend. Some truths must exhale before they can be buried." He released the pipe, and the pulse stilled. The silence that followed was complete, until, from far off in the hall, came a soft, unaccountable sound. A single, drawn breath that seemed neither echo nor machine, but unmistakably human. The sound, soft, deliberate, unmistakably human, froze us all. Holmes's eyes flashed toward the hall. "Remain here," he said quietly. "The dead do not walk, but the living may yet deceive." He advanced, revolver drawn, the faint lamplight stretching our shadows along the wall. The air had cooled to a strange stillness, the very silence seeming to hold its breath. Another inhalation came, shallow but near, then a faint cough, real and frail. Holmes halted beside the doorway. "Watson," he murmured, "listen closely." I strained my ears. The sound came again, a breath followed by the scrape of cloth against stone. Someone crouched or knelt beyond the threshold. Holmes signaled once, then stepped through. In the half-light of the corridor, a woman lay slumped beside the wall, her pale face turned upward toward us. Evelyn. Her lips moved faintly, catching at the air as though she struggled to breathe for two. "Good heavens, she followed us!" I exclaimed. Holmes dropped to one knee, supporting her, head. "Evelyn, why are you here?" Her eyes fluttered open. "She called again," she whispered. "After the burst, I heard her ask for me. I came to answer." "The voice you heard," Holmes said gently, "was no spirit. It was the dying breath of a machine." Evelyn shook her head weakly. "No, it wasn't. Not this time. It was her." Holmes's jaw tightened, but his tone remained composed. "You believe your mistress spoke after all we have witnessed?" "She said my name, clear as yours." Her eyes darted toward the pipe along the wall. "It drew me here." Holmes's expression changed, sharp attention beneath calm. "Watson, observe. The auxiliary conduit runs above this passage. Its vent opens just here." He touched the brass mouth fixed into the stone, the aperture no larger than a coin. From within came the faintest whisper of air, regular and warm. Holmes frowned. "Impossible. The central pump is destroyed." "Residual pressure?" I suggested. "Not of this constancy," he muttered. He pressed his palm against the vent. "There's warmth, human warmth. Someone breathes upon the other end." I stared. "But the far end leads to the old servants' quarters," he finished, "where the first mechanism was tested." Evelyn's fingers clutched at his sleeve. "Please, don't go. If you break it, she'll fade completely." Holmes met her gaze. "Miss Evelyn, what you call her presence is only the echo of memory, but that echo has a source, and I mean to face it." He rose, turning to Weller. "Stay with her. If she worsens, call out." We followed the line of the pipe through the adjoining corridor. Each few yards, the breathing grew more distinct, no longer mechanical, but irregular, catching, as if filtered through sobs. Holmes quickened his pace. "This is not illusion, Watson. Someone is alive beyond these walls. We came to a narrow stair that spiraled downward into the remains of the West Wing's cellar. The passage reeked of oil and dust. Halfway down, Holmes raised his lamp and froze. A faint beam of light flickered through a fissure in the masonry. Beneath it crouched a small door, its edge rusted, but newly forced. He tested the latch, unlocked. With a single motion he pushed it open. The chamber within was scarcely large enough for a man to stand upright. Amid coils of copper and broken cogs sat a narrow iron cot, and upon it a figure, gaunt and motionless, save for the slow rise and fall of his chest. "Pa!" I gasped. Holmes stepped forward, astonishment flashing across his features. The elder Pa, alive, barely. The old man's eyes opened, glinting faintly. "I told you," he croaked. "I breathe while she breathes. The system feeds me still." Holmes examined the apparatus beside him. A small hand bellows rigged to a copper mask fixed upon the man's mouth. The device drew air through the pipe we had followed, exhaling it back toward the upper rooms. "Good Lord," I murmured. "He's been drawing the same air that animated the house." Holmes spoke evenly. "You rigged a self-sustaining circuit, Mr. Parr. Air for air, breath for breath. Ghastly imitation of life." The old man smiled faintly. "Not imitation. Continuance. When the machine ceased, I gave it my own breath. It speaks now with mine." Holmes leaned close, voice stern. "And in doing so, you turned yourself into its final victim. This cycle will suffocate you. You are breathing the house's poison." Parr's voice rasped. "So be it. I built it to last beyond me. Let it carry her voice when mine stops." Holmes's tone darkened. "You misunderstand permanence, sir. What endures through deceit consumes what is real. Release the valve." The old man shook his head weakly. "If I stop, she dies." Holmes seized the lever beside the bellows. "Then mercy demands her death." He wrenched it free. The hissing ceased. Parr gave a shuddering gasp, then fell still. The silence that followed was immense. Above, through the vent, a single long exhalation drifted like wind through reeds, slow, final, and strangely peaceful. Holmes stood motionless. "There," he said softly. "The last lung has emptied." We carried the body up the stair and laid it beside the shattered machine. Evelyn wept quietly. He said she'd never sleep. Holmes regarded her with uncommon gentleness. Now she may. The breath that haunted her chamber was his own. He clung to it, hoping to preserve her soul, and in doing so, trapped them both. Weller whispered, "Then the house is breathing, every sigh. Was him?" "Not always," Holmes said. "At first, the invention alone. But later, when grief learned the mechanism's language, it spoke through him. He became the ghost his science had promised." He turned to me, voice low. "You see, Watson, even reason has its fever. He sought order in sorrow and built madness from precision." We began to extinguish the lamps. The air, no longer pulsing, grew naturally still. Yet as we stepped toward the hall, a faint echo rose through the ceiling, a low intake, followed by the softest exhale, like the settling breath of a sleeper. Holmes paused at the threshold. "Listen," he murmured. "Not fear now, only rest." The sound diminished, merging with the wind outside until it was impossible to tell where one breath ended and another began. Holmes's words lingered in that vast hush, the house settling about us with the slow composure of something newly emptied of spirit. I felt the silence press against my ears until even the faint rustle of our movements seemed sacrilegious. Then came the soft crackle of the last embers dying in the grate, followed by the faint intake of a night breeze through the fractured window. The motif returning, natural now, unmechanical. Holmes listened to it a long while before speaking. "That," he said quietly, "is how breath ought to sound, free of design. Evelyn looked up from where she knelt beside Parr's still form. Will they bury him with her? Holmes's gaze softened. Perhaps they should. Death has already united them more completely than blood ever did. Weller rubbed his temples. I cannot reconcile any of it. My sister's death, this machine, his madness. Was it grief or obsession? Holmes turned toward the shattered cylinder. Both, I think. Parr sought to conquer mortality by mechanical symmetry. When death broke the pattern, he rebuilt it from air. It is the oldest heresy of intellect to imagine that thought may substitute for heart. He crouched, examining the remains of the brass valve. Note, Watson, how the smaller diaphragm here differs from the others. The curvature allows for resonance, not compression. I suspected as much from the start. This machine was never merely a respirator. It was a listener. I frowned. A listener? Holmes nodded. Observe, the pipe's interior is lined with a phonographic groove. Every vibration within these walls was inscribed upon its metal. For years, this house has been recording its own sounds. Its size, footsteps, even speech. When Parr reactivated the mechanism, it exhaled fragments of what it remembered. The house has been breathing its past. Evelyn's face blanched. Then those whispers, the ones that called me, were echoes of yourself, Holmes said gently. Your grief, your prayers, trapped in the conduit and returned to you as ghosts. She covered her mouth. Then I was listening to myself all along. Holmes inclined his head. It is the cruelest trick of the human mind, to mistake the echo of one's pain for another's forgiveness. A long pause followed, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the broken window. Weller moved to the bed and drew the sheet over the old man's face. The constable will come by dawn, he said quietly. Holmes dusted his hands, and with him, a physician. You will explain nothing of voices or breathing machines. Say only that a mechanism exploded while we examined it. Leave the rest to me. He turned to Evelyn. And you, Miss Parr, you must go home to your mother's parish. The past is no longer here to tend. I have no home, she murmured. Then you shall have your peace, he replied. Let that suffice for now. She looked at him through tears. You speak as though you've known grief. Holmes's expression altered subtly, his eyes withdrawing to some private distance. I have known analysis, Miss Parr. It is not always the lesser torment. Weller approached, his voice low. You saved us from superstition, Mr. Holmes, yet I cannot help but feel that something, some part of her, remains in these walls. Holmes gestured toward the pipes. Memory does linger, but not as souls. Air retains pattern as wax retains sound. The breath that once frightened you will fade when warmth dries the metal. Let nature erase what man contrived. As he spoke, a faint rattling arose from the corridor, the tremor of a loosened pipe settling back into place. Evelyn startled. Weller crossed himself. Holmes merely smiled faintly. There, the house exhales its last remembrance. He lit a fresh match and handed it to me. Watson, make note of the hour, 3:30. At this time tomorrow, these contraptions will be dismantled. I'll have the yard send an engineer. While I recorded the time, Holmes knelt beside the main conduit once more. Curious, he muttered. Even in its ruin, the workmanship is fine. Clockmaker precision, almost tender. It reminds me of the automaton in the Louvre, a thing built to imitate life so well that it deceives even the builder. He traced the curve of the pipe with a gloved finger. But what deceived Parr was not mechanism, Watson. It was the vanity that he could compel love to persist through air alone. I said quietly, You speak of him with pity. Would you rather I spoke of him as criminal? Holmes replied. He built a prison for his grief. I have done no less, though mine is lined with deduction instead of brass. The remark struck me with unexpected force, and I saw in the flickering lamplight that Holmes's face bore the exhaustion of one who has stared too long into the mechanism of human sorrow. Evelyn rose unsteadily. "Then it is over." Holmes offered her his arm. Over, but not concluded. Grief seldom yields to reason. It only changes its rhythm. He led her toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The wind had risen slightly outside, and through the open window came the distant toll of a church bell, low, measured, and resonant. Holmes listened. "Ah," he said, "the world breathes still." As we passed into the hall, a faint metallic chime echoed behind us, one of the fallen cogs rolling slowly across the floor until it struck the skirting board and settled with a sigh. Holmes stopped and turned his head slightly, a thin smile upon his lips. "The final pulse, Watson. Every case ends with one." He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into quiet dusk. Yet as we stepped into the fading light of morning, a single, gentle draught passed through the corridor, an unforced, natural breath that seemed to draw warmth into the house once more. Holmes looked back only once. "The air remembers," he said softly, "but it also forgives." Then he closed the door, and the sound of the latch echoed like the calm inhalation of dawn. Holmes's hand lingered upon the door handle a moment longer, his fingers tracing the iron as though he listened to the last tremor of sound it held. Then he released it, and the faint echo died in the corridor beyond. "Come, Watson," he said quietly. "There remains one last duty before this house is finally silent." The chill of dawn crept through the broken windows as we descended. Behind us, the ruined chambers exhaled their final measure of air, each sigh dissolving into the other until the whole structure seemed to breathe out its confession. The motif that had haunted us through the night was fading into the ordinary rhythm of wind and timbers, the living reclaiming the language of the dead. In the entrance hall, the constable had arrived from the village, summoned by Weller's telegram. He stood uncertain, cap in hand, staring at the blackened cylinder and the bodies beside it. "Lord preserve us," he muttered. "What manner of contraption is this?" Holmes brushed past him with a calm authority that brooked no question. "A case of fatal mechanical experimentation. Record it so. The house will be sealed for inspection." The man nodded obediently. "And the lady, sir?" He glanced toward Evelyn, who stood near the door, her shawl drawn close around her. "She returns to her family in Surrey," Holmes replied. "See that she is escorted to the coach at once. She is no subject for questioning." The constable hesitated. "There was talk in the village, sir. Breathing sounds at night, the house cursed." Holmes fixed him with a level gaze. "Then let the villagers hear this from you. The curse was air escaping through rusted valves. You may assure them the ghost has been buried with the inventor." When the man had gone, Holmes turned to me, his voice low. "Superstition, Watson, is merely grief in search of an explanation. When fear finds a mechanism, it calls it a miracle. When the mechanism fails, it calls it a haunting." "And yet," I said, "one cannot deny that this case possessed the essence of haunting." He smiled faintly. "Indeed, for even reason may tremble when the air itself whispers." We stepped outside. The morning fog rolled low across the fields, and the first light of sun touched the upper windows of the house, glinting upon the fractured glass. Holmes paused on the threshold, the wind tugging at his coat. "Note the symmetry, Watson. Every structure breathes. Wind through chimneys, heat through cracks. What separates a house from a lung is only purpose. Parr's error was to give his walls a will." I regarded him in wonder. "You almost sound as though you pity him." "I do," Holmes said. "He sought to master nature by imitation, but there is no victory in copying the inevitable." He drew deeply upon the cold air, exhaling slowly. "You see, the true miracle of breath lies not in its repetition, but in its ceasing. We walked toward the waiting carriage where Weller stood, pale but composed. "You have our gratitude, Mr. Holmes," he said. "I can hardly express—" Holmes lifted a hand. "Spare me gratitude. The lesson belongs to all of us. When intellect presumes to outlive conscience, tragedy merely borrows the form of invention." Weller lowered his gaze. "Will it ever stop, that sound in the walls?" Holmes glanced back at the house. "Not for a time. Buildings, like men, take a while to forget their habits, but soon the wind will learn a new rhythm." Evelyn stepped forward then, her voice small but clear. "Mr. Holmes, before you go, last night after it all ended I heard something. Not words, not breath exactly. A sound like the sea in a shell. It seemed gentle." Holmes inclined his head. "That was silence, Miss Parr. You only mistook it for the sea because you were listening for ghosts." Her lips trembled in a sad smile. "Then I shall learn to listen differently." He handed her a small envelope, the folded page of her letter. "Keep this. In it lies the truth of what you felt, not what you feared. The difference is everything." As she departed, the carriage wheels struck the stones with a rhythmic cadence that mimicked the night's phantom breathing. Holmes noticed it too. His eyes followed the vehicle until it vanished into the fog. "There it is again," he murmured, half to himself. "Life repeating death's pattern until it learns its own measure." I touched his arm. "You are tired." "Perhaps," he said, "but not of the case. Only of the metaphor." We stood in silence a moment longer, listening to the faint whisper of wind passing through the eaves. Then, abruptly, a sound, soft, almost tender, rose from within the house. A final release of pressure, the air escaping through some forgotten seam. It came as a sigh, low and human, fading into the cold morning. Holmes turned back once more. "The house's farewell," he said. "Let it breathe its peace." We climbed into the cab. As the driver urged the horse forward, I glanced behind. The house receded into the mist, its upper windows glinting like the eyes of a thing newly emptied of thought. The rhythmic clop of hooves took up the motif again. Steady, natural, living. Holmes leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You see, Watson, there was never a ghost. Only the persistence of a sound mistaken for memory. But it serves as metaphor enough for mankind. We build our fears from echoes, then convince ourselves they speak." "And yet," I said softly, "there was something in that house that neither of us could explain." He looked at me sidelong. "Perhaps. But explanation is not always truth, my dear fellow. Merely the form it takes when we can endure it." For a long time we rode in silence. The wind moved gently through the hedgerows, and once again I heard it, the faint, cyclical hush of air in motion. Only now it soothed rather than chilled. Holmes noticed and smiled faintly. "Listen well, Watson," he said. "That sound will follow us long after this case is forgotten. The unending rhythm of the living world, reminding us that reason, too, must breathe." The carriage crested the hill. Behind us, the house of breathing walls disappeared into the soft gold of morning, leaving only the whisper of air and the echo of one last sigh carried on the wind. The whisper of air trailed behind us as the cab descended the hill, fading into the soft hush of dawn. Holmes sat with arms folded, his profile sharp against the paling sky, the faintest tendril of breath curling in the cold. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The only rhythm was the horse's steady exhalation, living, honest, and unmeasured. "It is a curious irony," Holmes said at last, "that a house built to imitate life has taught us so much about death." I glanced at him. "And about love, perhaps." "Love?" he repeated with mild surprise. "A dangerous hypothesis, Watson. Love obscured reason, multiplied error, and constructed a tomb that breathed. What virtue lies in such sentiment? The virtue, I replied, of reminding us that even reason has its heart. You unraveled the illusion, yes, but you did so because you pitied them. He regarded me sidelong. Pity, perhaps, is only an intellectual recognition of waste. Parr's genius was genuine, yet misapplied. Imagine if he had turned that obsession toward medicine or physics. How many lives might have been saved rather than mourned? And yet, I said quietly, he sought only to save one. Holmes's eyes softened. You are a forgiving man, Watson. I envy it. I fear I am too long acquainted with deceit to trust its tender disguises. The carriage rattled over the bridge where the river shone beneath the mist. The sound of water mingled with the breeze, a continuous breathing of the earth itself. Holmes leaned forward slightly, listening. There is your motif again, he said. The pulse of the world, indifferent to grief. We imagine our tragedies disturb its rhythm, but they merely accompany it for a bar or two. You speak as if grief were music. It is, he murmured, repetition seeking resolution. He withdrew his pipe, but did not light it. Instead, he tapped it gently against his palm, keeping time with the horse's steps. Do you recall, Watson, how the first breath we heard at Baker Street struck the window pane? A vibration so faint yet sufficient to draw us into 10,000 words of illusion. How fragile the threshold between curiosity and compulsion. I smiled faintly. And yet you would cross it again tomorrow. Ah, undoubtedly, he admitted. For curiosity too must breathe. The cab turned into the main road to London. Morning light began to scatter across the hedgerows, illuminating the smoke of distant chimneys. Holmes observed it with the abstracted air of a man examining evidence invisible to others. Tell me, Watson, he said suddenly, what, precisely, have we solved? The mechanism, the deaths, the false haunting. Yes, he said, and yet not the essential mystery, the compulsion to make the lifeless move. Whether through science, superstition, or memory, man refuses to let silence remain silence. The living forever force the world to breathe for them. He paused, then smiled without mirth. And we call it invention. The remark silenced me. The wheels clattered rhythmically upon the stones, forming their own faint music. In it, I thought I heard again the echo of the house, the mechanical sigh, the turning of gears. But softer now, transformed. Holmes leaned back, eyes half closed. You see, Watson, I do not despise the man. His folly was the shadow of something noble, the refusal to surrender wonder. That same refusal keeps civilization awake, but where he wounds springs, I prefer to wind reason. And where does that leave those of us who still dream? I asked. He looked at me then, with that quick flash of warmth so rare in him. It leaves you precisely where you belong, between the measured and the miraculous. That is why you must write these things down. You breathe feeling into the facts I would otherwise dissect to death. I laughed softly. Then perhaps we are each other's lungs. Holmes gave a low chuckle. A poetic diagnosis, but not an inaccurate one. The cab passed through the outer streets. London was waking, shopkeepers opening shutters, milkmen calling, the city inhaling its daily life. Holmes observed the bustle with a contemplative expression. There, he said, gesturing toward the rising smoke. The great organism renews itself. If Parr had looked upon that instead of his mirror, he might have learned that immortality requires no machinery. Only memory, I said. Precisely. For a time we rode in companionable silence, the rattle of the wheels merging with the city's breath. The night's weight had lifted, yet some echo of its sorrow clung to me, a faint pressure in the chest, like a note unresolved. Holmes must have sensed it, for he said gently, "You are thinking of the girl." "Yes." Her faith was misguided, but it was faith nonetheless. What will become of her? She will survive, he said. She has learned that love cannot be wound or measured, and perhaps so have we. He tapped his fingers on the window pane, the gesture almost rhythmic. You know, Watson, there is one part of the case still unsolved. Oh? Who first heard the house breathe? Was it truly the servants, or the guilty conscience of its master? Fear is often the earliest inventor. I smiled. Then perhaps the case began long before the bed was built. Holmes inclined his head. As most mysteries do, they begin with a sigh. We reached Baker Street shortly before 8. The fog hung low over the rooftops, but the familiar hearth smoke curling from our own chimney carried a comfort beyond reason. As we entered the sitting room, the warmth enveloped us, the fire murmuring like a contented sleeper. Holmes removed his coat, hung it behind the door, and stood listening to that quiet flame. Do you hear it, Watson? The fire. Yes, even this burns with breath. The draw through the grate, the exhale up the flue. It is the same pattern, endlessly repeated. The difference lies in meaning. He seated himself in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Our task is not to silence such sounds, but to understand which are alive and which merely imitate life. The world is full of clever ghosts, my friend. Some of brass, others of memory. I nodded, struck by the weight of his tone. Then what of you, Holmes? Which are you? He smiled faintly. Ah, Watson, I am only the echo of deduction, animated perhaps by your chronicled breath. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the city's pulse swelled. 1,000 carriages, 1,000 heartbeats. The same air that had filled that accursed house now filled our lungs, untainted, ordinary, human. As I took up my pen, the fire gave a soft sigh, and I felt in it both the end and the beginning, the eternal exchange of air between silence and speech. Holmes's voice came low across the hearth. Write it true, Watson. Let the world hear that even in silence, life persists. And as his words faded, the fire drew in a single long breath and exhaled, its embers glowing like the steady pulse of something finally at peace.